Welcome to The Journey, a podcast to help you be the very best parent you can be. We are thrilled you are here and that we get to do life together. We are here to serve your family, and we're thankful you're joining us on The Journey.
Hey parents, welcome back to The Journey. This is Dan Panetti. I've got Alycia Wood, and she is a fantastic friend, speaker, apologist. You've been here a few years ago with our Biblical Worldview Conference. Love to get you back. But if you want to find out a little bit more about her, she's currently with Apologetics, Inc. And so you can find her at apologetics.org. And what a great group of people that you're with out there, really being able to train Christians on how to defend the faith against a variety of different things. And so that's kind of your background. And I ask you, as we're getting ready for Easter, I ask you to help us think through what I would consider like gospel-centered conversations. And what I mean by that is, how do we weave conversations into kind of more than just a conversation about the weather or about, the local sports or, hey, I just watched the Masters, or my kids are, throwing up and I don't know what to do. I mean, we have conversations all the time with people, but they're temporal conversations. And I think there's a way of weaving those conversations into eternal conversations, because it's not that we just want to sit down and say, hey, did you know that Jesus rose from the dead, right? The kind of the Easter conversation. Right. But I think people have a sense of there's a real despair and hopelessness in the world today. I just got done watching a movie called, or a Netflix series called Adolescence. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
I've been hearing about this. I've not watched it yet.
Okay, it's very, very, it's weird. It's not, and we're going to do an episode on it, so I don't want to get into it. But it's very depressing. It's very depressing of the concept of humanity, and there's really there's no hope. Right. And so I think, Alycia, that we have an opportunity, right? God says that he's the God of hope, right? And that we can actually find hope in Jesus Christ. And so is there a way that you would encourage our parents to think about things, to engage in conversations that would help them move from temporal things to kind of eternal things? Do you understand what I'm saying? Can we help our parents kind of navigate that path?
Yeah. And so let me first of all just say that parenting right now is a very challenging thing. And, with all of the issues and things that are going on, I can imagine parents feeling like, what in the world? We didn't deal with any of this stuff. And this definitely wasn't in the parent one-on-one handbook, with all the different issues. And so I think that I can understand parents thinking, how do we even connect or relate? And I will tell you that there seems to still be clues. There seems to still be connection points with our young people. So it could be whether, I think it's really important for if your child is exposed, that the parents be exposed, in the sense of like, if whatever they're seeing, whatever that is coming into them via phone, via friends, via film, via music, whatever, have an awareness of what is being out there, because it helps you to understand where your child is at. Right. And then if you understand that material, then you could say, okay, well, that material is interesting. And what does it say? So there was a song, you might remember the guy, Paul Walker, who was the actor, right, and he passed away in a car accident. And Wiz Khalifa wrote this song, and I'm going to butcher the words, but it's basically like, it's something like, it's been a long time without you, my friend, and I'll tell you all about it when I see you again. Right? And you got this very interesting. So let's just pretend that your child is listening to that. And it's such a fascinating phrase, when I see you again. And it's almost like, what do you think Wiz Khalifa believes about the afterlife? Right. Is he making a statement about the afterlife here? Is this something that we can use to then say, well, he seems to believe in afterlife, but in order to believe in afterlife, there's got to be a spiritual aspect, because the physical, natural body is dead. So that's a whole spiritual, it's supernatural, more spiritual type experience that makes us wonder about the supernatural, that makes us wonder about what that might be like, makes us wonder about, well, what happens? What does it look like? What's the afterlife like? Is it good? Is it bad? Is there something we can do now to impact what that looks like for us in the afterlife? So you could even take something like that, just a song, a tragedy that happened in the culture, and use that as a good touching point to connect to. It seems like even Wiz Khalifa, and I have no idea where he is, spiritually, But it seems that he even seems to think that there's life beyond here. Is that something worth us thinking about? Because when we lose somebody, that's when that becomes really important. It isn't just about us. When we lose somebody and we long for them again.
Hey parents, a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, Guidestone Financial Services. Guidestone is a fantastic organization that has been connected with and involved with PCA for a number of years. Their mission at Guidestone is to enhance the financial security and resilience of those who serve the Lord, which is people like you and me. They do retirement, insurance, and investments. And Dr. O.S. Hawkins, who is a PCA grandparent and the recipient of this year's Zig Ziglar Servant Leadership Award, was the leader and CEO of Guidestone for a number of years and is really connected with their Mission Dignity program. So check out Guidestone. Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. I've had several people talk about just when you're at a wedding, nobody's listening to the pastor, right? Because everybody's involved in the moment, and they're just celebrating, the union of these two people. But when you're at a funeral, everybody listens, right? Because your mortality, right? It's like somebody has just passed, and the idea of like, well, okay, well, what happens to me? And so using those aspects, those events that happen all the time when somebody passes away, to have a conversation and saying, not only to our kids, but our friends, our coworkers, right? Of, well, what do you think happens? And I think, where James is so important when he talks about be quick to listen, slow to speak. I think when I talk about, gospel conversations, I'm not talking so much about even what you say, but what other people are saying. Right? Are you asking questions? Are you asking questions to your kids? Are you asking questions to your family? Are you asking questions to your coworkers? Are you asking questions to your neighbors? When events happen in life, are you saying, well, what do you think about that? Mm-hmm. Right? And then do you have an answer that you can provide for them when they turn to you and they say, Alycia, what do you think about that? Right? Mm-hmm. And you say, oh, I'm so glad you asked. Here's what I think, and here's why I believe that. But I think we're so afraid to ask those questions, and we don't really get into opportunities that we really can have meaningful conversations and dialogue with people, right, on just everyday things that lead to, right, extra, kind of extra depth. There's a spirit, as you said, there's a spiritual component, right, yeah, that just so easily fits into the natural world, right, and we just need to take those little launching points and jump into it every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, just taking just whatever current events are. So this one happened about a year and a half ago, and you're probably very aware of this. I mean, you've talked about it on your podcast, but the conversion of Ayan Hirsi from atheism, new atheism, actually, to Christianity. Yeah. Huge deal. Somebody from the very top of the new atheism movement who taught for the last 20 some odd years that religion is evil and should be eradicated, leaves that view for Christianity. And she said life is good, like in terms of husband, kids, like there's nothing going on there that was wrong. But atheism could not answer fundamental questions about the meaning of life. Yes. It struggled to answer questions for why we're here. Does it matter that we're here? Does it matter what I do? Do I matter? Do I mean anything? And it spiraled her down into alcohol, and she tried to get counseling and therapy, and it was a therapist. As she went from therapist to therapist to find, it was a therapist who told her, "You're experiencing spiritual bankruptcy." Yeah. That cultural moment is such a great launching point, because it's almost as if it's like the new atheism is given credibility to the fact that there's an emptiness here. It can't answer everything. Yeah. So if it can't answer everything, then it can't be the full source of knowledge. And there's got to be something else that's going to answer everything. And so that's a great launching point for conversation. And I think with young people, sometimes it's hard because they don't really think about meaning of life a lot of times as young people. Right. And so it's like, well, just keep living. And just understand that at some point when you have to get up at 5 a.m. Monday through Friday, go out in the rain and the cold to get into your car to drive to work, to come home, and maybe it's still raining or it's snowing or it's dark, and you get home at by the time you get through rush hour and it's 6 o'clock and you come home, you don't have any food to make, and you make dinner quickly, and then you're tired and you got to go to bed. And you wonder, you do it day after day after day, and you begin to wonder, does this matter? Does this matter that I'm doing this? And that's when these questions really start to circulate. And so I think that culture movement would be a great one to utilize to talk about why are we here? And actually, it's not just that we ask that question, but the answer is important for us to be able to flourish. It's important for our mental health. It's important for our drive to strive better in life, because we think that there's an actual purpose here, that it's not just emptiness, and so it affects our flourishing and affects our ability to live, affects our smile. And so I think all of those things would give good reason to use another culture moment to help our kids think through why it is that Christianity is the source of answers.
So I'm glad you brought up the whole idea of human flourishing, because I see that in the culture, and really not just the American culture, but I just read a report, right, that in Japan, there's a huge movement of young men who are not leaving their home for years, right? They just had a report on one guy who hasn't left his home in 7 years. And he stays in his room, he plays video games, his parents get food for him and do different things. And there's this move. They said there's over 1 million young people in Japan, right, that haven't left their room, right, for over a year. And there's a particular name that they give them. And I'm just like, here's the thing. I think there's the whole concept of purpose, meaning, significance, right? Because as you said, right, you get up at 5 and you're like, what am I doing this for? And it's the grind. And is there a purpose? You have to ask that question when you do that. But if you don't do the grind, right, if you stay in your room and you insulate and you isolate, right, and COVID did this to us, right? It's like, we just kind of stay in our little cubby hole, and we never interact with other people, and we lose community. And I'm just telling you, especially a lot of men are isolated. They had a report where they asked men, how many friends do you have? Right? True, honest friends do you have? And the number one answer was 0.
What?
0. Right? Most men will tell you, I have no friends.
Where was this survey? Was this here?
I can't remember. Yeah, it was here in America. Right?
Wow.
But it was amazing to think about, right? That we don't do community well, and that we're not asking those questions because we're so isolated, and we're not living a purposeful life. Because the cool thing about what God gives us is He gives us a purpose and a significance, right, for why life is difficult. But if you just make life easy and you never do any of the difficult things, you never ask, well, what am I really doing here? You just sort of glide through and go through. It reminds me of the movie, from years ago, right, when I think it was a Disney or Pixar movie when they made WALL-E. Right. And it's just a bunch of people who are sitting around, right, eating and enjoying and expressing the pleasures of life, but they actually don't make anything. They don't create anything. They're not significant. And that's just a hardship for, where we are in today's world. Right. There's not a lot of us that are out there, when Paul's talking about, being a soldier, being an athlete, being a farmer. Right. Like, you wake up every day and you have to do something significant. Well, I mean, here's the deal. Not a lot of us are doing those things, right? And so we're not wrestling with the great questions of life, because life isn't hard. Life is easy. It's become so easy just to sit back and let life go past you. And 1 year becomes 10 years, becomes 40 years, right? And that life doesn't have meaning and significance. And so you don't ask the big questions of life. How do we make sure that our kids, from a parent perspective, how do we put that in front of them so that they understand that life has meaning, significance, that you're created with a purpose, right? And that purpose has meaning. And you and I talk a lot about the issue of abortion, right? And just kind of this cultural concept that so many people feel like that they can, take a person's life because they want to have the ease and comfort of life. I'm not ready to be a parent, and so I'm willing to, right, eliminate somebody else's life so that my life is better. And I just think marriage and parenting and all those things that force you into that concept of, what is meaning, what is significance, what is purpose, who are you? I think a lot of people are just avoiding those things, and they want, personal pleasure and comfort. That's our God of today. What would you say for parents? How do I raise a generation of young people who have a life that's purposeful and meaningful?
Well, first of all, I mean, I had heard a little bit about what was going on in Japan. I did not realize it was 1 million. I mean, that is way beyond what I thought it was.
Crazy. Yes.
I had no idea. And I think that is scary. I've been to Japan. It's a beautiful country, the nice people I've ever met. But man, I don't know how that sets up people. I don't know how that sets up adults for the next generation, right? When the parents die out after caring for this adult son, what are all of these 1 million adult men going to be now? And how are they going to teach young people to be adults? Like I just wonder future wise the long term implications of that.
Yep.
But you're right. It is a lot of pleasure seeking, what feels good to me, what works for me, my truth, your truth, what I think is good. I mean, I think the last time I was on here, your podcast is, I think we did transgender as a movie, or we talked about gender. I've done a lot on that last couple of years. And so I think a lot of what we're dealing with is, yes, there's a lot of pleasure seeking. And it's interesting because you also see people say, well, we have the highest mental health rates that we've ever had. And yet there is so much. We also are the most privileged generation. When we're cold, we have heat in our house. When we're hot, we got AC in our house. We can sleep in very warm beds. If you get up in the middle of the night and you have to go to the bathroom, you don't have to go outside and be scared of being attacked by some wild animal, right? You walk 8 feet into the bathroom in the house. These are all things that people in other generations didn't get. For most of human society, we are so pampered and so cared for. And what happens is that does almost put us into a mode of just comfort and complacency, as if your existence doesn't matter to the global community, right? So who you choose to be, who you go and whatever career you decide impacts not just you, but impacts everybody. We don't live in isolation. So if I had chosen to become, let's say if somehow I was called to be a doctor instead of an apologist, okay, that's fine. You probably would have had your podcast and it probably would have been going, and you probably would have had somebody else on today instead of me. But the listeners would have heard something different. And so they would have walked away with different lessons, different things to take away. Just by me choosing a different career path would have impacted what they would have heard today, even though I won't ever meet them. Right. And so the reality is the decisions that we make impact us on a larger scale. And so I think we need to help young people realize that actually your existence matters. What you choose to do matters. It impacts us all. I remember one time when I was like a substitute teacher in school, and these kids were not caring. They didn't care about, I was doing math. So, I mean, a lot of people don't care about math anyways, but I love math. And I remember, they weren't doing the work. They weren't doing their assignments, nothing like that. And it was inner city. So, there's other struggles that come along with it. But I remember one night just praying and being like, Lord, I don't know what to do to really help awaken this in them. And I feel the Lord really just gave me something that I just went into the classroom and shared. I was like, I don't care. It's a public school, but whatever. And I basically told them this, like your life impacts me. If one of you chooses to be, let's say, a doctor, then you might become my doctor one day. And you're going to make decisions for my health care that are going to change and impact my life. I want to know that you're studied up. I want to know that you know what you're talking about. And so I kind of basically shared this whole thing that I'd said to let them know that it matters. And so I think in our young people, I think sometimes it's just, if they don't realize the larger scale, reach on the world that each one of them has, this truly is the next generation. And they don't oftentimes realize that impact. And I think letting them realize that their role here, and this is where Acts 17 is helpful, where it talks about God determined the time set for us in the exact places where we live.
That's right.
Right? So your existence, not just period, but your existence now in this place is here for a purpose. And there's an intentionality behind it.
Yeah, I think even the young people growing up with what we call influencers, those people that were our young people or even adults are following their lead. I think that concept is something that really is something we need to make sure that we understand. We're all influencers, right? Now, our scope of who we influence may not be as large as some of the other people, but we're influencing the people that are around us. We're influencing our neighbors in the way that we treat them. When I go to the store, when I drive on the tollway, when I go to work, I'm influencing people around me, and I can be a positive influence, and I can be a Christ-centered influence, right? Or I can choose not to be. And I think that's one of the amazing things. The movie Adolescence. I don't want to. There's 4 episodes. The last episode is just the parents, basically talking, and their concept is, did we do everything that we could have done? And their reality, because it's not Christ-centered, is that there's really nothing that we could have done differently. The dad's basically like, I did better than my dad did. My dad was abusive. I wasn't abusive. So my kid turned out to be a killer. Like, what could I have done? And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like the decisions you make affect other people, and the decision to let your son sit in a room and consume whatever content comes across that computer screen without stepping in, without helping to train. I just think about this. I kind of laugh. I think we do a better job, for a lot of people, of training our dogs than we do training our kids. Where if your dog, you came home every day and your dog, went to the bathroom on the floor and bit you every time you walked in, you'd be like, this dog needs some training. For our kids, we just let our kids be kids. Right. And it's like, well, I can't look at their phones because that's their phone. Or, we just put them up in their room, we close the door and they're looking at whatever they're looking at, and we're not training them. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Right. We need to be training our kids, and we need to be having those conversations with them to help them navigate what is right and what is true and what is good. Right. And that discernment of being able to say, there are some things that aren't going to help you become the man or woman that you desire to be. There are some things that are, and we need to be busy about those. And I just think it's such an important concept, right, for these, conversations from a parent perspective with our children, that we need to be telling them that, God created you with a purpose. As you said, Acts 17, God literally put you here in this particular family. For a reason, right? We've told our kids that a million times when they ask, what about Jimmy and Susie, right? And how come they get to do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, well, God didn't give them right to us, right? If they were our kids, they wouldn't get to do that. But you're our kids, so you have these particular parents, and I think that's important for kids to know, right? God's designed these things, put you right at a particular place in a particular time with these particular parents, and the influence that you have, right, is that eternal influence. Right, the people that you're around, you get to be Jesus to them, right? And it's not the people in the 1400s, and it's not the people 1400 years from now. It's the people right now. These people, as C.S. Lewis will tell you, right? You've never met a mere mortal. The people around you are eternal beings, and they have an eternal destiny. And what are we doing to influence the eternal destiny of the people around us?
I like that. What are we doing to influence the eternal destiny of the people around us? And I think, there's a reason why the kids are still under the parents' roof, right? And when you look at, what they tell us about the prefrontal cortex and the development of it and how long it takes into the 20s for the men, right? Like they're even though they're big, it doesn't mean that their brain is reflecting the size of their height. The brain development is still not there, and it is being developed through these channels, these current things. It is still in the developing process. And what you are feeding into it is still impacting it. So that's a really interesting thing that you said about the dogs, because you're right. If the dog went to the bathroom every day, you would deal with it. You would address it. But if it's different, if it's a child, and you think, well, maybe I just kind of let them do. And it's like, actually, no. Like, thankfully their child probably is not using the bathroom in the living room every day. However, there are other things that should raise flags for you as well. Like, this isn't good. This isn't okay. I do need to step in. And it's always like, being the bad guy, right? I'm not your friend. I'm your parent.
Right.
And that kind of idea. So I do think it's a very interesting era, and I think it's a very challenging era. But I think that in spite of the challenges, like digging your heels in and saying, actually, I know this isn't good for you. I mean, the connection between social media and mental health, those have already been made. The CDC has made that. Jonathan Haidt has made those connections. So there's people out there, secular culture, that has talked about the connection between social media and mental health. And I won't go into it because I'm sure you've covered all that at length and ad nauseum at some point. So the point is, we know that what children are currently involved with is impacting them, is my point. So changing that changes things. So when we talk about gender, somebody comes out and identifies as trans. One of the things that you do is you pull them out of their social circles, change the schools, change their friend groups, send them to grandma's house for 4 months on a horse farm. And all of a sudden they don't feel trans. Right. That shifting environment changes their mental understanding of themselves. And that's not just for gender. That's not just social media. It's for other things that are going on within the household. And so that's getting back to what we talked about in the beginning, the music that's feeding into them. What are the, who are the influencers that you talked about that's feeding into them? What are they feeding into this developing brain? And that's shaping and forming their ideas, their understanding of themselves, their understanding of their culture, their understanding of God and who He is. So all of these things are informing and shaping. And if we don't rein some of this stuff in, it's going to be harder for us to kind of make Christianity make any sense, because they're being fed so much other stuff, and now you got to clear so much more garbage to have Christianity seem like, okay, actually there is something here. Yeah. So yeah, I think the influencers, which it's really just a silly joke to me, because who becomes the influencers? Because how are they influencers? Because they know how to put on makeup, because they wear certain kind of clothes. I mean, that's what they do, funny little experiments. Yep. Like, this is who we want to influence. Like, I want people who are like intelligent. Maybe they're economists, maybe they're sociologists, maybe they're psychologists. Like, I want those to be the influencers, the theologians, the philosophers. Like, that's what I want to influence me, not someone who talks about, nails and stuff like that. Like, that's so trivial. And so that we do need to be mindful of all this stuff. The culture is kind of dumbing us down in a sense. And what scares me as an apologist is I appeal to reason. So if I have an audience that doesn't use reason, then where do I fall into play?
Where do you fall? Yeah. I think it reminds me of Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death book that he released in the 80s. And just how, the generation that is not word-based, but is image-based, your attention span, right, decreases significantly. And the ability to really to be able to understand, and as you said, right, the appeal to reason, the depth of an argument, the ability to ask questions, to dig underneath something, right? Our kids are losing that because they're not able to read, and we're not making them read. We're not creating readers. And then I think, ultimately you get to the point where the Bible, is not a movie, even though we just went and saw The Chosen and it was fantastic and I really enjoy it. But it's not a movie, it's a book. And our kids need to be able to learn how to read that particular, book, that, the Word of God, right? The Word became flesh, and it's Jesus Christ, right? And there's a book written about, right, who He is, and the prophecies that lead up to Him, and the life that He lived, right? And the death that He died, the resurrection, and all those different things, right? Those things, and you get the New Testament, right? Because, then, Paul is basically saying, if all that stuff is true, right, then what does that mean to how I live my life? And I think it's like, yes, you have to have that concept, right, that God does have a purpose for your life, right? And I get the stories, right, that Scripture weaves in of watching these particular lives, and I say, well, what does that then mean to me? And there's a particular depth and significance that comes with those who have a mind, right, that can wrestle with things. And I think it was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was, the movie when I was a kid that basically asked that particular question, right? What happens to a generation of young people that aren't disciplined, that only watch TV, right? And that's what the whole movie is about. And there's only one kid in there that has the responsibility enough that, right, that, Willy Wonka is going to give him the chocolate factory when he gets older, right? It comes from this, this little boy who isn't handed everything. He doesn't have a life of ease. He's got, grandparents living with him in the home, and you get that multi-generational concept, right? That he grows up with a different experience than everybody else who's just had life handed to them on a silver platter. And I think that's a huge aspect for, for our families, right? And where we live, right? We live in a very affluent area where life can sometimes become very easy. And so we have to do things that make life a little bit harder for our kids, right? We just got done talking about our mini-mester, where we take kids all over the world and have them go share the gospel. Part of that is we take them to places that are difficult to go to. My son just went to the Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Right. There were kids in Uganda, all the different places there. Even when we went to Hawaii, right, you're thinking, okay, we're in Hawaii, that must be an easy place. No, they're dealing with homeless people, right, in Hawaii. And there's some very, very rough and difficult areas for our kids to be put in. And it forced them to kind of say, oh my goodness, right? Different people live different lives. How do I take my existence and make connections to people, right, halfway across the world? And right, the connection really is that we're all created by the same creator, right, with a purpose to know him and to make him known.
Right.
That's ultimately what existence is all about. And so
that's the YWAM model.
It is. It's the YWAM model.
Right.
Take that right to the ends of the earth, get on a boat and share it with everybody. Right. But that's what my son got to share with people, right? Going down the Amazon River, right? That God knows you, that God loves you, that God sent his son for you. And maybe you haven't even heard this before, right? But we hear it so often that it kind of becomes noise to us. But that's the message of life, right? That God loves us and he sent his son to die for us. How do we know that we're loved, right? Well, God paid a price for us, and that price was the death of his own son, right? And that can relate to everybody, right? Because, I've got 4 kids, and if I had to think, I was going to have to give up my son's life for somebody else, well, that's a price that I'm not willing to pay, right? But God was willing to pay that price for me. Right? And so I just think it's like these conversations are so meaningful, that people need to hear us talking about things that have meaning and significance and purpose. And we need to create a generation of young people who are able to have those things, right? That they can read and they can understand the word of God, and they can go share it with people regardless of where they are, right? And so whether it's the transgender question, right? They meet a person, they go, right? Whenever I see somebody who's struggling with a gender or identity issue, right? To me, it's not a, hey, look at that person rebel. To me, it's look at that person who's so hurt, right? That they're looking for meaning and significance, but they're looking in the wrong place. And who's going to be willing to tell them the truth that, hey, here's the deal. God created you a male or a female, right? And it's designed in every aspect of your DNA. So if you want to cut off body parts to think that you're going to control that's not going to work, right? Yeah. It's not going to work, because every cell in your body is still going to be a male or still going to be a female the way that God designed you. And that helps then, right? Because now it's not me designing it. It's, wow, there's somebody outside the system who has designed it, and he's in control, and he's got a purpose for my life, and he's got something written for me that's even greater than what I can even ask, think, or imagine for myself. And I think, right, Alycia, how do we get kids to develop that depth where they're able to understand that so they can go share that with other people?
Yeah. So I was thinking as you were talking, we started with kind of like, how can parents, share this gospel, help this gospel to connect and relate to their young people, and that's being in touch with, it's always important. I think this is where Acts 17 is helpful, just knowing your audience.
Yes.
Right. So Paul, same gospel message based on where he is, Athens or wherever he is, he's going to use the same gospel in Berea. That's the other one, or Thessalonica. So he's giving us the same gospel message, but based on who his audience is, he's just going to communicate it differently, and he's going to cite different sources.
Yes.
Okay. So in front of Jewish audiences, he uses the Jewish scriptures, the Old Testament. In front of Athens, he's citing their own people. Right? Yes. Their own Greek poets, same gospel message, but using different ways to give it some girth and give it some foundation. So as we're trying to, encourage parents, know your audience. In this case, your audience is your child. What is it that's influencing them? What is it that's impacting them, so that you can make those connection points, same gospel message, but how can you use even the cultural things, like we used the example of the Paul Walker death earlier. But I think also the parents also need to teach their kids to do the same. So when you're going out to the Amazon, when you're going out to Hawaii, and yeah, there's a lot of homeless people in Hawaii. I go to YWAM several times a year, and they're big base down in Hawaii, and we've done street ministry with the homeless. It's a warmer climate. It's easier to be homeless in a warmer climate. And so, teaching your kids how do you understand your audience? Where is this person at? What is going on in their mind? What are they thinking? What has influenced them? All of these kind of questions, that then when they're sharing the gospel, they're sharing it specifically to them in a way that will connect with them as well. So parents are doing it with the child and modeling it to connect with their child. And then you're sending your child out and you're doing the same thing. Showing them, okay, you need to know what their influence are. You need to know what's impacting them. Just like if you were telling me that you were sending people to the Middle East, well, they should probably know a little bit about Islam. Know your audience so that you can find your connection point.
Yeah. I think that's so important. Finding the connection point with your kids, right? And that just takes work. And I know, going back to the show Adolescence, it's going to be very interesting when you watch it, because you're going to see all these things in it. But the police officer or the detective doesn't know a lot of things that he's talking about. And his son actually has to sit him down and say, "Hey, Dad," he goes, I was just so embarrassed at how much you blundered, right? Because the dad hadn't taken time to look at how kids are communicating, and he didn't understand it, and so he's talking about things, right? And I get this sometimes too. The kids look at you and like, you're an old head, right? Like, you don't understand the language, you don't understand all the different things, and kids aren't talking about that. It's okay, I get it, right? I'm definitely from a different generation, but I want to make a connection with kids. Right? I
Yeah.
want to take the time to understand some of the things, and then I want to help them understand, right, that whatever they think is the greatest thing and the coolest thing, here's the deal: all the stuff that I thought was great and cool when I was a kid, it's all gone now too, right? So it's all going to pass away, right? And the things that really are going to stand the test of time, right, are those things that really truly have meaning and significance in life. Right. So it's okay to pay attention to some of the temporary fun stuff of life. But I'm just going to tell you, right, that stuff's going to go away. And so how do we create a generation of young people to really appreciate? I think of, Jeremiah 6:16, right? When God's looking at him, he says, stop and look, ask for the ancient paths, and then walk in them, right? And you'll find rest for your souls. That's what we're actually talking about, right? What are the things that are meaningful and significant that are going to give you purpose in life? And how do we raise a generation of young people to really, truly appreciate those things? The temporary things, they'll come and go.
Right.
The things that you think are important and popular right now, right? I could list off, and you and I could do this, right? List off 10, 20 different bands and super famous people from the 70s and 80s, and our kids would know none of them. Right. And they'll tell their kids, about all these super important people, and the kids will know none of them. Right? By the time when you get to the grandkids, right? Most of us don't even know our great grandparents' names.
No.
Right.
Isn't that something?
Things will pass away, but what are the things that are going to be eternal? And let's make sure that we're reminding our kids to focus on the things that really do have significance and meaning, right? And as we get up to this, Easter, weekend and celebration, let's make sure that we're, making sure that our kids understand, right, that this is the stuff that we're talking about 2,000 years later, right, about this particular man who lived this particular life, right, died this particular death. What is the meaning? What is the significance of this? And what does it mean to me? So, Alycia, you've been fun to talk to. I know we just batted around a bunch of different ideas. And things, but I enjoy the conversations with you all the time. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Dan. I always love being on your podcast. I still brag about Prestonwood when I travel around about how amazing school it is. And so, no, I'm always happy to kind of jump on and kind of chat with you and see how we can help parents, as this is just a very wild era.
Yeah. Well, I know we'll put in the show notes the link to apologetics.org. And I know you've got some great stuff out there. So, Alycia, keep up the great work. Keep up the God-centered work that you're doing. And hopefully we'll have some more people who not only find out more about you, but who pray for you, right? Because as you're out there defending the gospel, training the next generation of young people to think critically and Christianly about the world around them, you're an influencer that we want our kids to know. So
thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Journey. We hope this podcast provides information to help you raise your children, and it would help us tremendously if you would like, subscribe, share, and review this content on your favorite podcast platform. It is our pleasure to provide this information to our community, and we look forward to our next time together on The Journey.